Hello everyone, and today I'd like to do a new video talking about virtues. So this will be a very interesting video about virtues, and I'd like to discuss some very interesting things about it. Okay, so yeah, stay tuned until the end of the video. We'll talk about a lot of interesting things. Okay, so let's get started. So we all have virtues, and the virtues are like these principles by which we live by, and different cultures have different ones, right? And going back to like 1300 BC, we have this oldest moral instruction by it was called the amenemope, and it was a moral instruction book where it literally told us step by step of how to live our life. And going back to these ancient philosophers, like for example Aristotle, he talked about something called the telos, or the purpose in life to which you aim yourself. Budha also talked about doing good things to others as an important virtue, and Epicurus also discussed living justly and nobly for a pleasant and happy life. And Confucius also talked about doing to others what you want to do to yourself. We talked about this in the reciprocity video earlier. But these ancient texts are a guidance on how to live. So they kind of guide us, and they're more so based on general moral truths and role models rather than proofs or facts per se. So this is what the author mentions in this book. They're great to guide us how to live this moral richness, as he calls it, but at the same time they're not really based on proven facts. They're more just based on role models and putting us in awe or admiration for these virtues, right, through role models and other people actually implementing them. And another thing he talked about is the importance of practice and implementation. So these people were more so based on the importance of practice and putting it into your daily life rather than proving it or backing it up with evidence. They're more so based on general truths and role models. Nevertheless, they do present a lot of moral richness, these moral principles by which we can live by. So yeah, it was more like, if you do this, you will be a virtuous person, so do it, without so many facts or proof. So ancients knew that being virtuous requires time and requires the training of the elephant, because just telling facts to the elephant is not enough. You need to actually train the elephant to do it. We also need to feel like it's the right thing to do and actually want it. So we have to have that social perception and the social emotion piece Haidt was writing about in his book, right? We need to feel like we want to do it. So we have that social perception, and we actually want to do it. We want to have that emotion. We want to have that motivation. We want to feel like doing something. So they're also not very parsimonious, because science like to have one law for which everything else is derived for, but these ancient texts give you a bunch of things to follow. And they also don't explain the importance of passion and emotion. So they overemphasize the reason and how it was a gift from God, right? But of course, it's also important to focus on the emotional piece as well. And later enlightened thinkers actually didn't want ethics to be so based on this divine power. So there's also that piece. Later around in the 1700s, so now we're talking about the post-consumer era, we have these two philosophers. Immanuel Kant, the first one I'll talk about, he talked about using applied logic and having universal rules by which to judge people. He called this categorical imperatives. So is this the right thing to do? Is this action moral or not? And then we have Jeremy Bentham, which is an English philosopher, who discussed utilitarianism. So utilitarianism is when you maximize the amount of people who benefit from the good you do. So you want to focus more on the consequences of your actions rather than on the actions themselves, like what Kant talked about. So here's an example. Killing a person will save 100 other lives. So Kant would be against it because killing is not universally acceptable, or Bentham would be for it because it would save more lives. So, of course, unless it would set a bad example that leads to further future problems. So there was this debate, but they both agreed on parsimony, which means that you want to just create a simple law by which to govern actions and people's behaviors. And also, they want to overemphasize reasoning over emotion. So they both agree that feelings and gut instincts are not important, and that you want to focus more on moral reasoning. And so also they treated all people exactly the same, regardless of where they're from, who they are, the historical era they lived in, their beliefs, etc. All need to act in the exact same way on a certain dilemma, like kill one, save five, or kill a fetus for stem cells, or these difficult situations. So now actually we have this quandary, or we have this dilemma type of society where we don't really have we went away from this character type of society on which was present before, right, with these ancient philosophers, these ancient texts, all that talked about importance of character development. But now instead we went away from that and we talk about quandary. So we focus more on its moral reasoning, but we don't really have these rich moral virtues to fall back on. We just have this kind of choosing it for ourselves type, for our children, for example, using problem solving and moral reasoning to kind of tackle best the situation, rather than having these strict virtues to focus back on. The author gives an example of a person called Ben Franklyn, who worked for his brother in a print shop, but left him at 17 due to conflicts, and he got his own print shop and he became extremely successful. He understood this concept of telos and wanted to realize his full potential, right? When he was focusing on 13 virtues, where he would literally focus on one value a week and literally put a mark in his notebook each time he broke this value. And he would do it for 13 weeks, each week for one value, for all his 13 values. And he would improve each time, and that would really make him happier. The guy lived till 84, which was a lot, of course, at that time. And so clearly he focused on this virtue, kind of the importance of having virtues in our life for happiness. So we all have virtues in different cultures, but now it's less so based on the virtue type of world that we live in. Now we are faced more with these binary questions and moral quandary, where we're forced to answer questions with our own values rather than a universal shared kind of character model of virtues that was present earlier before the consumer era. So these two philosophers influence our lives, and now we're focused more on moral reasoning, right, rather than having kind of this these virtues to fall back on. And Peterson and Seligman actually created in the 1900s 6 broad virtues for people to follow, and it was opposed to the fact that we didn't have a way of describing people's potential and talent, because they thought, well, the DSM only focused on people's disorders and disease. Well, why do we don't take a strength-based approach? And each of these 6 virtues actually have specific strengths and how to cultivate them as well. So they talked about having to focus more on our strengths as well. So the point being is that now we're faced with more of binary questions and moral quandary, where we're forced to answer questions with our own values. And this gets people how to think, but not what to think, because there's no values and moral facts to fall back on. So there was a push in the 1980s from a value-free morality that's literally culture and context free towards more of a character development, because right now we have this culture free right, where we don't have this shared identity, and we have people just letting them choose how to act based on moral quandary dilemma type of situations. So we teach them how to act based on these principles, based on deontology, based on utilitarianism, but we don't teach them exactly what to do. We don't give them these virtues that will improve their character based on exactly what to do. We teach them how to act, right? The process, the moral reasoning, but we don't teach them exactly, what to do in these particular situations. We give them choices, and they have to problem solve by themselves, which is an issue, at least what Haidt mentions in the book. So there was a push in the 1980s, right? This depth of character is problematic, and the increasing moral diversity, whereby we don't have specific moral virtues to focus on, and we let everybody decide what to do, is a problem. And so we teach children to find their own values and the reason through dilemmas and quandaries. So it's our culture that gives us meaning, and if it's context free, it means everyone has the same exact virtues and values to follow. So this is also problematic, right? Having this context free and culture free and environment. And it's also a problem if we give the same virtues to everyone, but having no virtues is also a problem. So the author shows this kind of a balance, right? He says, you don't want this anomy whereby you have a lot of moral freedom, because you do want to, as we mentioned, have a bit more of this moral richness like the ancients do, but you don't want it to be, of course, too strict as well, right? And you also want to have that self-interest, because sometimes when we have a lot of virtues and to fall back on, and specifically after the post-consumer era and influenced by Kant and right, it was more so a society whereby we had a lot of moral principles to fall back on, right? But because of all of these moral principles to fall back on, it was very we didn't have as much diversity. So we don't want to have a lot of freedom, but we don't want to have too little either. So the author talks about the youth charter community to prevent this moral diversity, where we're value free and only rely on moral reasoning to solve problems without anything else to fall back on. So we should have the demographic diversity where we respect different races and religions, but unfortunately we should limit the moral diversity and instead have a shared identity to fall back on. This will allow us to kind of gain back from what the ancients talked about for strengthening our character, and what Aristotle talked about, the telos, and having a purpose in life. So I strongly think that we should have virtues to live by on, from which we should set our goals, and this shared identity is definitely important. This shared identity is definitely important because we don't want to have nothing to fall back on. We do want to have virtues and a culture whereby we have a shared culture, and this gives us some sort of identity because we have virtues to fall back on, rather than living just not knowing what to do. We know the process, but how exactly do we act in this particular situation? What do we base our lives on? So I think having a virtues in life is also having a meaningful life.